Hi, Toph. Good morning. All
Good
right,
morning.
this is Toph Marshall from the University of British Columbia, here with us today to talk about the Catalogue of Ships from the Iliad. Okay, whatever you want to start with, you may.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to be here. I really love the catalog of ships, and I'm sort of including the catalog of Trojans that comes right afterwards as well. But the entire second half of book two, just I think, is an opportunity for Homer to step back and sort of reassure his listeners that, or the poet to reassure their listeners that what's going to come is going to be worth their time. And so it's a real showcase. This is how awesome my singing can be. And we really sort of see it. It's not based on narrative so much, but by setting up patterns of geography and meter and tempo with small details. I think we create a real show-stopping number, if you will, to get the poem going and convince listeners that it's worth hanging in for the next 20 hours. Um, I'll say my thinking on this has really been shaped by some work by Elizabeth Minchin. I really like her understanding of catalogs, and I've sort of incorporated that when I teach this passage. But here's the bard establishing his credentials.
I'm very excited about Catalogue of Ships. To me, the first time I read it, I was like, "This is so cool. We're looking at the ancient world like through Homer's eyes." Like, I mean, everything to him is ancient, right? I mean, because he's Iron Age and he's recalling a Bronze Age stuff. So some of the stuff he's making up, but a lot of it is tradition, and so I found it so fascinating because he's only like a few hundred years away, whereas we're like thousands of years away from it. And so I loved the descriptions of the clothes, the armor, the kind of armor they wear. I mean, there was to me the one where they're wearing linen armor, linen corselets. I'm like, whoa.
I'd like to come back to that in a little bit. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Uh, so the like the whole notion of composition and performance is sort of being challenged here. Like so much knowledge is packed in tight, and I know people can read this with an eye towards reconstructing archaeological detail or to the geographical placement of sites. My interest is, I'm going to say, primarily poetic. I want to understand the feel that the poet is creating and the effects that the Aoidos is introducing in order to shape the audience experience. I don't know. Did you ever watch the Animaniacs when you were growing up? The Animaniacs
I
have this
loved
song.
Animaniacs, but I don't remember the Iliad Trojan
You
War.
don't remember their Iliad song? Well, their Iliad song is is when they sing the nations of the world.
Oh my gosh.
And if
Okay.
you remember, it begins with Yakko showing a map of the world, and he touches every country when he sings it. But it's United States, Panama, United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Republic Dominican, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador, to Costa Rica, Belize, Nicaragua, and they just keep going and going and going all through the most of the hundred and so many nations of the world. Um, and I think the enjoyment that I get from that song um, is the same enjoyment that the original listeners of the Catalogue of Ships would have got. There's a rhythm, there's a pace to it as things gradually speed up as they keep going. There's variations in tempo. There's geographical clusters that don't need to be rigidly enforced, but if you know anything about that part of the world, you get that frisson, that moment of recognition where oh yeah, no, that's right. And maybe you're also noticing some of the details in the stories as well. They when they talk about Germany's now in one piece. They omit South Africa because it was done at a time of apartheid. There's small details um, in this 5-minute cartoon that nevertheless tell stories. And I think with much more gravitas, much more seriousness. The Catalogue of Ships is also one of this, showing off the ability of the performer, and it's not going to be the exact same emotional effect as an animated mouse creature thing, but it is creating, it is using the same techniques and the same effects, and so for a performer like yourself, I think it really is a way to convince the audience that, no, look, this is great stuff. I'm prepared. I'm going to be entertaining you, and I'm going to be convincing. And it's that convincingness that I think is also being conveyed. Anything that he does say has to be recognizable. He can't, if he's introducing a story, if it can't be gainsaid automatically. And so when we get to the moment we've just challenged Agamemnon's leadership, we've introduced Thersites, and then they start mustering the troops, and all of a sudden it's like the camera pulls back. I'm very cinematic when I think of this. It's like the camera pulls back, and it's one of those shots where all of a sudden you're in space and you're seeing how broad, in fact, everything is, and you can no longer get the individual details. I think that's what the catalog also does, because as we're pulling back, we see that the scene that we've just seen in Iliad 1, the first half of Iliad 2, is only part of the story that's going on. We're being told the story of Agamemnon, Achilles, and Briseis. But as we pull back, we can maybe see the similarities of that story with Paris, Menelaus, and Helen. But in addition to that, there's all sorts of other stories too. When we're told about Philoctetes, we're told, the few ships of Philoctetes don't have a leader. And we're told a little bit why. We're told about the water serpent. And this is Homer establishing, hey, I know this story. People are going to be writing tragedies about this. This isn't my focus, but trust me, I'm reliable here, and I could be telling this story too. I could be telling this story too. I could be telling, and it's really the heroes that he says the least about that come to be the most important in the poem. So Big Ajax only gets a line or two. In the Catalogue of Trojans that comes immediately afterwards, Glaucus and Sarpedon are the last entry, and they just get 2 lines as well, but they're so important to the Trojan, to the presentation of the Trojans and the Trojan understanding of what's going on in the Iliad. I think he's saving the details about Big Ajax and Glaucus and Sarpedon for his main poem. He knows what's to come.
That is such a great way of such a great overview of the Catalogue of Ships, and Toph, I can't even begin to say how much I appreciate you being here, and that the fact that you were excited. But I said Catalogue of Ships because most people are like, Catalogue of Ships snore, and I'm like, oh no, it's really
no, we never snore. When I teach the Iliad, I spend a whole lecture on book 2, and I have to speed up. I've only got a couple of weeks to cover the Iliad in translation, but book 1, 2, and 24 each get their own lecture.
Are there any little stories in book 2? Yeah, okay, that's what I want to hear about. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, so when we do get to the entries in the Greek catalogs, like we could look at Nestor, for example, which begins at 591. We know that Nestor comes from Pylos. He's got 90 ships. So we sort of can see the structure of each of the little entries. There's the leader, there's the number of ships they've got, where they're from, and maybe we get a little anecdotal story. And so the Nestor example, which comes early, sort of in the middle rather, is a good example of this. We know who the leader is. We know he's important from what he's said in book 1. We know the number of ships. We know his town. But then we get a story. And the story that they choose for Nestor, that the tradition has chosen for Nestor, is actually nothing to do with him, and really not too much to do with Pylos either. But we get the story of Thamaras, the Thracian singer, who is who boasted and competed with the muses, and ends up being blinded as a result. Now, this too was something that Sophocles would write a tragedy about, but the I like the association of Nestor, who's established as a great speaker, and the story of Thamyras as the great singer who loses his ability is sort of in contrast to that. I think, and one way to look at the relevance of Thamyras is that this is exactly the opposite of who Nestor is going to be. Nestor's the trusted speaker through the generations. Thamyras is the great bard that is not going to have his musical gifts always. But at the same time, implicitly, there's also a contrast with our singer, the Aoidos, who is establishing his singing credentials. So I sort of like the role of the muses in that. We hear about the best-looking guy who came to Troy, Nereus, who I don't think is mentioned anywhere else, but we're told he's really good looking. When he's describing when the poem describes Achilles, we get details of how he got Briseis. And the poet also tells us that he's going to be coming back. So it's not that he's unaware of the wider story. It's not that this was a separate composition. It's just sort of being plunked in. This is, I think, quite deliberate. I've mentioned Philoctetes. We've got some sons of Asclepius, who are both healers, we're told. And I'll say one other that stands out in the Greek entries is the guy who comes from Dodona, and his name is Gunius. And we just get this beautiful description of how lovely northern Greece is, with the rivers flowing through the countryside and this sort of idyllic pasture landscape with the silvery water floating by. This is at 748 and following. But underneath the beautiful river is the river Styx, and it's sort of like a river on top of a river. And again, I think I can take that as a poetic symbol for some of the ornament that we see in the Iliad. There's this lovely, elegant description, but there's this deep undercurrent as well that is about death and about human experience.
Back to the story of the singer, whose ability was taken away by the muses. It reminds me that a couple of times in book 2, the bard is referring to himself. Tell me, muse. He goes back to that, and then I something something, and I went, I what? Am I reading this verb right? Yes, he says I. So it's a very self-aware thing that, as you said, it's brilliant what you said, that this is the bard himself saying, I am about to tell you this, and I am a reliable bard. And a reference to the muses pops in, and how muses can take away ability, but I, the bard, am singing you this because they gave me the ability, right?
Exactly. So if we look at the introduction, before we get the Greek entries, starting at 455, the troops are all coming out, and he starts with similes. And we know that these similes, Homer's similes, they're rightly famous, but it's, in this case, the similes are stacked. There's 4 similes, and he keeps starting one and he never fully finishes it. It's almost like, no, that's not quite right. Then they came out like fire, but they were like fire, but no, they're also like birds swarming around. But no, it wasn't bird swarming. It was more like flies swarming over milk. But that's not true either. It's like sorting goats out because they've got leaders and flies don't have, and none of these images is big enough or encompassing enough for what he's about to do. And so after 4 failed similes, deliberately failed similes, he says, muses, help me now. And this is the first invocation to the muses that we've had since book 1, from the first line. And he calls on the muses, asks for their help, and then he's saying, check it out. And he starts off with his tour around Greece. There's a geographical organization that begins in Boeotia, which says something about the place of Thebes in at the time of the composition, perhaps. But and we then get the catalog, and then at the end, after he's gone through all the Greeks, we get a little passage on who's good at what, sort of highlighting a couple of the key players who are going to be coming. We're told what Achilles' men are doing. We get a sense of their idleness. We're told that they're playing near the surf, so they're having a beach day while this is happening, and so there is some narrative component. And then finally, at 780, we recapitulate the fire imagery that was the first simile. And so in some ways, I take everything from 455 to 785 as being him trying to sort out this fire simile. The soldiers appeared like fire. We try these different things. Well, here they all are. Help me, muses. Yeah, that sort of is like fire. And he comes back and sort of settles on the image that he'd started with, but we're so much richer for it by the time he does. And so we think this is the end, but it's not, because then we get told that Iris is going to the Trojans, and then he gives us an encore. And the encore performance is who are all the Trojans? And it's actually in this that I think we get one of the most moving stories in all the catalog. But the catalog of the Trojans begins sort of at 816 and goes to the end of the book.
Okay, yeah. And so we were talking before I started recording that line 828.
Yeah.
Sad story. So you want to tell us about the sad story?
I do. Well, I have to admit that this is my wife's favorite passage in the Catalogue of Ships, and I didn't marry her because of her love of the Catalogue of Ships, but we do share that. Is it okay if I just read the whole translation? Is that okay? Just
Oh,
for this little passage?
I would love to hear you read it.
So here's one of the entries for the Trojans. Those who held Adrastea and the district of Epeisos, and held Peteia and the steep mountain of Terea, these were led by Adrastus and Amphios with his armor of cloth, the two sons of Merops from Percote, who had knowledge of seercraft beyond all others, and kept trying to stop his sons from going to war, which takes men's lives. But they would not listen to him, as the fates of Black Death were leading them on. Now that's from Martin Hammond's translation that I just happened to have here. But here we get, in some ways, the pain of anyone going to war. Here is a father who's sending his two sons to war. He is a prophet. He's got Mantizune, this seer craft beyond everyone else. And he tells his sons not to go, but their black fates are leading them on. They are going to die. And this is the sadness of being a parent. This is the terror of being a parent. This is the pain of human existence, all sort of summarized in these 8 lines. And my investment in Merops and his two sons, Adrastus and Amphios, has nothing to do with what happens later on in the story, but it's everything about what goes on later on in the story, isn't it? This is a poem about a father losing a son, about a father coming to terms with that by book 24. The fact that sons don't listen to their fathers, and that hurts. In these, 7 lines, we come to understand that the cost of going to war is not just felt on the level of the nations, like what we're seeing in the Catalogue of Ships, but it's felt individually. And just to see that as one of the many little stories, here's someone who tried to stop his sons going to war. It breaks my heart.
It's an echo of the whole Thetis and Achilles problem.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, with Thetis knew what was her son's possible fates, and she let him choose. But there she had a choice, and he had, I mean, there were a couple of choices she had. Was she going to tell him? You know, next, once he knew, which one was he going to choose? And she let him go that path. Where here, he tried to tell them, or he told them, and they're like, we're going.
So yeah, and I'm sure their fates were sealed, even though they're not wearing. You mentioned the cloth armor earlier on. This is the passage with the cloth armor. Again, there's this knowledge of actual details, but the linen and it's not that their armor is inferior or anything like this. This is just a localizing detail. But I think we understand the loss that is felt there, and the poet has included that in a minor way, so that when it comes later with Priam and Hector, we feel it again.
Well, thank you. I mean, for me, it's because I am very invested in the Thetis and Achilles relationship. Your mentioning this made me look at it for the first time, because there's just book two is just so rich, filled with stories that you zoom in on this for a moment, and then you lose sight of the other fantastic stuff until someone like says, but what about that passage? Oh wait, oh, you're right. Because the third or fourth time through, I'm looking at other things. My recent one has been, gosh, how many sons of Ares are there?
There's a lot, and the sons of Ares want to go to war. It's really interesting, and we know that in book 5, Ares is going to be on the battlefield too. It's not that he's high-fiving his kids or anything like this, but they're all there. So that's true as well.
Just the mention of like the gods who endorse certain people, like Pandarus, to whom Apollo himself gave the bow, right? Oh, really? Oh, okay. And then tracing back to who first gave, or maybe that was in book 1, who first gave the scepter to Agamemnon. Was that book 1 or book 2? I can't remember anymore. That was like a fun little short thing that I didn't realize. Oh, okay, right. So
Yeah.
just little details like who the gods gave this to a mortal, and then it's passed on, and here it is now. It's showing up here, or just mentions of like the one beloved of Ares or whatever, and oh, which epithets go with, okay, I didn't realize that he's endorsing this guy too, and so on.
It's nice, and I think you're right about Pandarus as well, because it seems like in amongst all these other details, we don't know that that's telegraphing what's going to be happening in book 4, but it's telegraphing what's going to happen in book 4 as well. And if we are attentive, we get to pick up these anticipations.
But there's so many, you don't know which one's important.
Exactly. But when they come back, you go, oh, that's right, he mentioned that. And again, it affirms the veracity and the authenticity of the poet, I think.
There's also talking about the dark fate, the black fate. There's a guy here, and of the Messians, so line 858, and of the Messians, I'm just reading off this particular translation. The leaders were Hermes and Enomus the augur.
Mm-hmm.
But with his auguries, he did not ward off black fate, but was slain at the hands of Iacchus's grandson. And then we have a swift of foot here, so that's kind of fun, right? To see that epithet in the river where Achilles was cutting down the Trojans and others as well. So, so another mention of an augur, somebody who has some power of seeing the future, but it doesn't matter because they
That's right.
die.
And the next entry among the Trojans there is someone who's eager to he's yearning for the sound of battle, and there's a really sad sort of unawareness in that person when he isn't aware of the ramifications of death. He's there for glory, and there is no glory.
And as you said, it the last entries are Sarpedon and Glaukos. And what do you think of the ending of that? Like, um, why are we ending there?
Well, I think if we see the inclusion of the Trojans sort of as an encore performance, like we burst into applause at the end of the Catalogue of the Greeks. It looks like we're back in the narrative with Iris going to Hector, and then we get an encore catalog. He never pulls us out of it. He doesn't have the same closural gestures that he had for the first one, and so certainly the sense of closure at the end of this book is a very strong sense of closure. We get a sense that this is a natural break where, again, the bard might stop and have a drink of water before he picks up in book 3, but or what we see as book 3. Without that closural gesture, there's a really strong prominence, though, given to Glaucus and Sarpedon, and I certainly think they do represent figures that you want to look out for in the Iliad. I think that their participation in this story isn't I'll say necessary to the plot, but they're always illuminating when we see what they're concerned with when they're fighting in book 12, when they're discussing the nature of fate and what Zeus rewards. I think that there's a lot that they offer a really good counterpoint to what Achilles is going through.
Speaking of performance, I think I mentioned as I'm scanning this slowly, something like half an hour every 50 lines, because I actually read it and I'm trying to understand what I just read and synesis and all that. And until you try saying all these things slowly, not as an exercise, you start realizing the way words sound and so on, right? And it's a lot of fun, actually. It's quite an exercise.
That's one of the things just about the composition, though, is that you can't fake that. It's not something that he can just come up with off the top of his head. This is a practiced part of the song, and all the names, the place names, not only do they have to come up in what is roughly the correct order for however he's organizing it geographically, but you can't you can't fudge proper place names in the same way that you could a narrative section or a purely narrative section, where there are all sorts of tools to help finish out the line or whatever it is.
Great point. Oh my gosh.
Once you start a place name, you've got to complete it, and it's got to fit, and it's
yeah. I mean, that's actually, I mean, that's astounding to me. Some of these lines are complete mouthfuls as I'm saying it, and I'm like, okay, it forces you to slow it down for sure. And by end of book 2, I'm exactly end of day 29, and I have to mention that I chose 50 lines just because it sounded like a good round number. But as I was doing it, I'm like, what's odd is every 40 to 60 lines, it's a natural break, because that's the end when someone is done talking. Now sometimes it's not, especially when someone is telling a long story and you're like, where can I break this? But for the most part, as a general rule, around 40, 60 lines is when somebody's done talking and it's a natural break. And just the way it turned out, it's a completely natural break for me to end day 29 at the end of book two. Like that's
Well,
the
that's great.
where it, naturally it stops and I would go get a drink of water and get back to it.
Yeah.
Performance
Well,
wise,
that's what we see happening in Odyssey Book 8, right?
yeah.
The Aoidos there is stopping and getting a drink, taking requests.
The descriptions again to me of the gods and their precincts, like here's the place of Demeter. I'm day 25, so day 26 around line 695 here, and Iton, mother of flocks. Like,
Yeah.
okay, who's Iton? Well, all right, like
No, but again, I think that's part of the point. There's so many people here, and the poet is showing how, or the bard is able to show how much in control of the information that he is. So you're talking about it. The opportunity to slow down, and the mouthfuls. The tempo is there, and I think that part of the showcase ability is the ability to maybe pick up the pace at some points, and that gives a wow factor. But whatever the tempo is for a given line, it's got to be consistent. There's like a metronome that's driving away at this, and maybe the tempo can change from line to line, but you can't stop and pause and reach for a well-fitting word. You're showing that you're in control of your poetry with all these proper nouns, and I think that's part of the excitement for the audience. That's what gets them invested and hooting and hollering and demanding more.
you have me all focused on all the prophecies now. So I'm looking at the prophecies of Cajas. Uh, so now that's going to be like a thing in my mind. Like, how many times is prophecy going to be mentioned in book two? Seems thematic. Definitely a little mini theme, if you will. That these are some things that they have to talk about and think about, right?
Yeah,
When
well,
do we listen to the gods and when don't we? When do we listen to dreams and when do we not? If
when do we
dreams,
listen to our parents and when do we not? uh,
well, let's not conflate parents because the gods lie. So we don't want to say that parents lie
there we are.
ever. Um, but um, but the dream that was sent. When do you trust the prophecy and when not? Because a dream was sent and there's a messenger. I mean, there's a big thing, right? There's a messenger, there's a dream, and one should trust the gods, and yet, oh well, no, I guess they lied to us, right? And when do you trust the leader? Oh well, okay, so everybody in the small council, everyone, this is what happened. I was told this dream, but let me test the men. That was kind of mean, I have to say. That was just so.
I think it shows that he really doesn't understand how dreams work.
But that was so cruel to test the men, like that. I mean,
Yeah.
and when I was reading it out of context one day, flipped into it. And this is during I think my undergrad, and because I'm sorry, as an undergrad, I didn't read, one place to another, not even in English. So, flip in and I'm like, oh, he's sending them home. Okay, all right. And then, so I totally misunderstood that whole thing, didn't realize, no, he's tricking them. And that was awfully cruel, I thought. And
Well, I
really,
think he expects everyone just to say, no, no, we want to fight for you and your brother. And he just misunderstands how frustrated and angry they are at having been there for so long. They're not there for their brother. They're for Menelaus, or they're there because they've been told to. They're told to go home. You bet they're going home, um, and that's what they need Odysseus for. And when Odysseus grabs the scepter and you start swinging it around, but that moment of physically taking it uh, is well, again, it's so cinematic in terms of who should be the leader here.
And that scepter brings me back to when you read, and I can't remember now if it's book one or book two, when you read that Hephaestus gave it to Zeus, who then gave it to, and to all the way the lines until it gets to Agamemnon, then you realize how important that scepter is, like the weight of it. Like this came
Yeah.
from the gods. Like this actually did. I don't know how I feel. Actually, I feel really bad about Odysseus beating up Thersites, but yeah, with a scepter. I mean, I get what it means, that thou shalt not go against the leaders and all, but it's just it's hard to read that scene. I think for a lot of people,
Yeah.
but that's the meaning of it. That's what we're supposed to get out of it, right? That scene that we're that they need to establish who's a leader. They need to, as Odysseus said, follow one leader to get through everything, and and I I can't help being on Thersites' side because he was saying Achilles was better than Agamemnon, and I have strong feelings about Achilles, and he was saying, that Agamemnon spoke up against someone better than him, against Achilles. And I get that Odysseus isn't saying that it's not true that Achilles is better than Agamemnon. But he's just trying to establish the order of things.
Yeah.
It's difficult to, to feel okay about Odysseus um, in that scene. I think.
Certainly, if we've got romantic attachments to Odysseus, I think it's very.
Well, I don't. I'm not. I don't particularly like Odysseus.
Yeah.
Never did, not even in the Odyssey. But except his depiction, his being depicted by Sean Bean. Well, then, if they lost out there, Toph. They should have had a Sean Bean, the Odyssey, because then I would have watched it and maybe I would have actually liked Odysseus.
There we are. Yeah, no. I'll say one moment that I really do like in the Iliad. I'm trying to think if I could find it really quickly. It might be near the end of book 4. He's called Odysseus calls himself the father of Telemachus, and rather than being proud of who his dad was, he's proud of who his son is. And I'm going to say, I think that's a unique moment. The closest might be Hector's prayer in book 6 for Styanax, but I really like the pride that he feels at being the father of Telemachus, and for me, that is something to admire in Odysseus in the Iliad.
That is something to admire, and I didn't pay attention to that line. So, uh, you know, I'm ready at all times to hear something nice about a character like Agamemnon. Agamemnon, I'm just like, I don't really understand why Hera likes you so much, but except that, he is the shepherd of men, he is the chosen one for whatever reason. Um, he was chosen. He just lineage wise, is that even a choice? Is that destiny? You just fell on his lap because he happens to be the son of this guy. Um, and that's why the gods like him, and that's why Hera favors him.
He uses it when he's actually beating up Thersites, is when it first comes up. May I no longer be called the father of Telemachus?
Yes, I saw that one,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
I thought
and I wonder if there's another one. But I like that desire to be Yeah, so book 4, around line 354 or 5. Um, he uses it again, that he'll be Telemachus' father.
So just the fact that he mentions it as a way to define himself, right? As a way to
He
say,
defines himself in terms of his son, not in terms of who his dad was. Everyone else, like line 1, is the son of Peleus, Achilles. Um, that the use of patronymics is well established. We know who a hero is based on their father, but for Odysseus, he's looking forward.
that is something. Now
Yeah.
that you've brought it up, and it's like, let me be worthy to be his father, right? So really looking forward to the Odyssey somehow.
Or or just something about the characterization of him that does understand that there is a future,
He
and that
mentions
again, that's why they're fighting.
he mentions the wives too, the wives that we must come home to. And I was waiting for him to say Penelope. He doesn't actually say her name, but it's something. Okay, all right. I'm seeing Odysseus here as a family man kind of guy. All right, I'm seeing it. I'm liking it.
There we are. So that's why I like the catalog of ships.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is a session, a conversation that I can take and definitely just the whole thing from beginning to end, show it to my kids once AP exams are over and we can actually enjoy the Trojan War and not just the Aeneid for exam purposes. Yeah, this was awesome, Toph, and I mean. You're the first person that jumped up and said they want to talk about Catalog of Ships in my.
You mean there weren't hundreds of us?
I never
No,
got.
it's hard to believe. I know, but there we are.
Thank you very much. This was so cool, and I just I hope I can bring you back for another book that we can talk about, and
I love that.
you can.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thanks again. Bye, Tosh.